We managed to lose, I guess, a whole card of footage, which in some ways we're surprised didn't happen more than once. But it's a huge bummer because it was about the pony wall that we did at the base under the straw bales that we used rocks from our own land for, and a lot of details utilities do. So, huge bummer. If we ever happen to find it, we will do that video because it's pretty crucial. So we're gonna try and work in those details as best we can throughout the rest of the process, but without having that footage, especially with utilities, it's gonna be pretty difficult. But we're at least gonna walk through some of how that went, especially with the stone itself and why we even chose to do that.
The idea with the pony wall and the stone wall is just to get the bales off of the ground so that any water, rain, etc., they're just not as exposed to moisture in general. So we did
equally that and a place to run our utilities, right?
Yes, so
right. Both.
So if you have a bale, we basically have two little stud walls underneath of the bales, and they're tied together.
Inches.
It's like 14 to 16 inches.
We're actually looking.
Can't remember. But so yeah, all of the utilities can get run in there, and then we just filled them with rock wool insulation. And then on the inside, we did drywall and plaster. On the outside, we did the stone. The stone was basically sandstone that came from the ridges on our property that we just went up and collected with the tractor.
We don't have a ton of rock, but we had
Yeah.
plenty for this project.
Ended up being more than enough, yeah, and there's still plenty out there. So we had that stone, and then we ended up going with a lime mortar that was about 1 part lime to 2.5 to 3 parts sand, and that depends on the ratio, ends up depending on your sand, but we used a hydrated lime that is powder, which is counterintuitive, but it's high calcium, and it basically, when you mix it with water and the sand, as it's exposed to oxygen when wet, over time it wants to return back to being limestone. So it gets progressively harder over time, but it's also a little bit more dynamic than cement. The cement is really strong, but it's really brittle. And thus far, we've been really impressed with the way the mortar's performed.
It's also the same lime that we used to plaster the outside of the house.
Yeah.
And so it looks really good together too. It's just kind of a creamy off-white, which is a lot nicer to me than gray, basically.
Yeah.
So it all came together really well too.
Yeah, so it was a way to kind of get used to working with the lime and make sure it was going to work and set up all those things. So it seems to usually set up within 24 to 48 hours and then continue curing over time, and it'll keep getting harder. So it's an age-old mortar. There's a lot of buildings that are 100 plus years old that use lime mortar. So it's a really nice material.
It was a good process overall. It was a lot harder than I expected. Just getting these really wonky rocks to stack well.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be extremely structural because the mortar's doing a lot of that work, and the weight of the bales is not on these rocks at all. There is some plaster weight here and there, but really not even that. So it's,
I would say that
structural,
it's carrying
but it's also
a little bit of weight, but
yeah, not the full weight of the bales. That's really on the framing of the walls.
Yeah. The stone may be carrying like 15% of the weight.
It would have been a lot scarier process if it were going to be carrying most of the weight.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, why we felt like we could just do it, having never done it before, because it wasn't as structural as a lot of the other parts.
Right.
But it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
He enjoyed a lot of it, but it was like August and it was grueling.
I think it was April.
We did the straw bales in July.
Yeah. So we did the stone before. Yeah. The mortar felt really intuitive to work with. The shaping the rocks was a little bit more of a learning curve, especially because there's a lot of irregular stuff that wanted to split into like weird trapezoids and things like that. So that's what ended up being the bigger challenge, was just basically the puzzle piece. And
trying to keep grout lines, not in a line, basically.
Yeah.
Kind of like how you would do brickwork.
Yeah, making sure that things are overlapping properly and weights being distributed well through the stone. But it kind of felt like one of those things where after a while you sort of get into a bit of a flow state and you just zone in and you stare at rocks a lot, and then you just start looking for the one that is the perfect rock for the next spot and just kind of work your way along. So yeah, it was a very slow process. It probably took a couple weeks, which was much longer than I would have liked, but at the same time I have no regrets.
No, we knew that it would
Really glad we did it.
It would give the house overall even more of the look that we really wanted, specifically because I think the rocks were from the land, and so everything just looks kind of meant to be. Of course, we love like old stone houses, especially in Europe, but we don't live in Europe, we live in Tennessee, and so it really looking like it belongs here was important to us. And yeah, it's just an added element that I think worked really, really well and was necessary to be able to do our utilities.
Yeah.
So to not have like plumbing lines and stuff like that going through bales, this was a way around that basically, and a method that a lot of people who work with straw bales use is some kind of pony wall, some kind of cavity at the bottom that's not straw that you can run all that through.
Yeah.
And that gave me so much peace of mind, actually.
Yeah.
Like all the hard work that it was, just like, I know I'm gonna be really glad we did this later on when I know that there's not water lines running through straw bales.
Yeah, and that also makes it easier to do any maintenance or changes to utilities in the future, having the pony wall. So that's another plus. So yeah, overall, it was a pretty good process. There's definitely a lot of figuring stuff out along the way, but technically speaking, with the pony wall and the stone, the stones are tied to the pony wall with wall ties in the joints periodically, and then you just have to make sure that there's a like air gap in there as well, so that there's a spot for like moisture and water drainage, because the stone and the lime will absorb moisture and there needs to be somewhere for it to drain, and then there's little weep holes along the bottom. So I had more info on that in the footage, but there's good resources out there for different ways to do that. So just got to make sure that you're detailing it properly.
And let us know in the comments if you have specific questions. We'll be happy to answer if we have an answer. And we're also going to do a resources video and share basically every book, any specific podcast, people, Instagram accounts, stuff like that felt really crucial to us along the way. So if you're kind of waiting for all those resources, we will do a full video about that, especially once we know a little bit better what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
But I know that that's really valuable, is just to know where to start looking. So we will have that as well.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Yeah, milestones.
Don't step on my secret.